Hello, everyone. This is What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You. Today, I am on with Dr. Loren Stuckenbruck. We're going to be talking about the Book of Enoch in the biblical text, specifically the New Testament, what Christians consider the New Testament. And there are a number of different texts that are either influenced or the writers seem to have an idea of the concepts in the Book of Enoch. You know, the text about the Nephilim and the giants and the sons of God that mixed with the women. But specifically today, we're going to be talking about Jude and how it seems to quote the Book of Enoch. We're also going to be talking about the books of Peter, or supposedly written by Peter, and they seem to have some type of influence or be talking about this idea of Tartarus, which is really weird and not anywhere in the Old Testament. But long story short, how are you doing today, Dr. Stuckenbruck?
Thank you. I'm very, very well. And it's so great to be with you. Thank you for allowing me to come on your interview.
Awesome. It's absolutely my pleasure. People might not know this, but you are one of the top scholars in the field of the Book of Enoch. Everywhere, if you look up any book on the Book of Enoch, you're going to be cited. Like, it was really funny because I kept reading your name and I was like, who is this guy? And then I was like, oh, let's go and interview him. And I think I've interviewed every possible person on the Book of Enoch except for you. So this is a pleasure.
Oh.
Could you talk about just really general the Book of Enoch? So, of course, what often people see as the Book of Enoch is actually not one specific text. It's got a number of different collection of texts that were written at different time periods, kind of like people often kind of see that like it's really the Ethiopic Book of Enoch that's like really a collection, and then there's actually 1 and 2 Enoch. I want to really talk about just a couple sections in the Book of Enoch, specifically the Book of Watchers, and then we're also going to talk about the Book of Parables, because that seems to have some type of Christian influence or something like that. There's a debate about that, right? Before we get into that, the Book of Watchers, could you just give us just a really quick summary of what happens in the Book of Watchers?
Sure. Thank you. The Book of Watchers consists of a number of parts in and of itself. It opens up with 5 chapters introduction that do relate to the figure of Enoch, which pronounce judgment on the sinners and say that judgment will be on the righteous as well as on the sinners, chapter 1, verse 8. And it also appeals to the natural order that follows the laws that God has given in creation and do not change from the paths and from the functions that they were given by God at the very beginning. That's chapters 1 to 5. Chapters 6 to 11 do not mention Enoch at all. The only biblical figure that we get from those chapters is Noah in chapter 10, verse 1, who is not named, but he's a son of Lamech. So we know from Genesis 5 that it has to do with the figure of Noah. And here, the angels decide, under the leadership of Semyazah or Shemichazah, depending on which version we're reading, to go down to the earth because they have fallen in love with the beauty of the human daughters. And he gets some 200 to go down with him, of which 20 leaders, each for 10, are actually named. And they produce offspring who are the giants. And the giants then do all sorts of bad things. They turn over, they subvert the created order in many of the categories that we find in Genesis 1. And people die, and their souls cry out in a lament that functions as a petition, but it's really a lament, which the 4 archangels take to God. This is all before the flood, and God responds with the flood and with commands to angels to subdue both the rebellious angels and the offspring, the giants. This ends up in a kind of unexpected way, predicting that all humanity will worship God in the end, which is kind of not what one would expect, that all would be such. One would expect just the righteous to be there and singled out. But in a surprising move, everybody seems to be included. So that's chapters 6 to 11. Now, the whole story about the fallen angels is then continued in chapters 11 to 16. And here, Enoch as a figure is reintroduced. He becomes a go-between between the watchers, the bad watchers, the rebellious angels who petition God for mercy. They know that they have been judged. They don't see much hope, but they're still begging that God will somehow be merciful to them. So they give Enoch their petition, and he brings it up to heaven in a beautiful throne scene in chapter 14. And God tells Enoch that the watchers' judgment and that of their giants, of their offspring, is irreversible. And that is really quite a significant point in the narrative. Here we have quite a lot of material that may be significant for the New Testament, and we may want to come to that at a later point. So chapters 17 through 19 pick up again on some of this, but the text turns towards visions of the cosmos, which are then followed by a list of the 7 archangels and their functions in chapter 20. Then in 21 to 26, we have a further series of visions, which includes the places of the dead, and have Enoch traveling through the cosmos to the north, to the south, and to the east, where he gets to see paradise. And he also asks about and gets to learn about a special tree in the midst of trees, which are amidst the 7 big and large mountains, one of which is really special because it resembles a divine throne, like God's throne. And so the Book of Watchers finishes at chapter 36, although George Nicholsburg has argued that it doesn't actually finish there, and part of the astronomical book takes up a point that concludes it in chapter 80-81.
Very fascinating. Okay. And so that's the Book of Watchers. And then there's another portion of text that is in what people consider the Book of Enoch today, but it was actually written later. So the what you were talking about, that was written it's like around 300 BC. Is that right?
Okay, yes. These 5 different parts were probably not all written at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I would place the 6 to 11 at the very beginning, and would want to date that to the first third of the 3rd century BC. The last part may be as late as the very beginning of the 2nd century BCE, like the 190s or something.
Oh, wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's very helpful. Thank you. Okay. And then we have the Book of Parables.
It's
and
okay.
that's I guess in modern versions of the Book of Enoch, it's 1st Enoch 37 to 71. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And could you talk about when this was written? And well, I guess that's a big question that maybe we can talk about. Yeah, maybe it's a kind of a complicated question. Could you just talk about first what happens in that, just really, really briefly?
Yeah, now very, very briefly, this this part of one Enoch, which is a single book within the Ethiopic tradition and only attested in ancient Ethiopic, in Ge'ez, and in no other language. I would argue. The parables consist of three main visions, which are not single visions in and of themselves. They are a series of visions that relate to all sorts of things. Perhaps most prominently, they relate to the final judgment, the holding to account of kings, mighty ones, and landowners who are held responsible for the way they oppress those who are called righteous and holy ones, or righteous and elect ones. Prominent amongst these visions are two things that I want to say. First of all, is that God is referred to as the Lord of spirits, and also the head of days and other names. God is referred to about 130 times in the Book of Parables. Less than that, but also very prominent and conspicuous to any reader, is the appearance of someone who is most often called the Son of Man, but can also be called the elect one, sometimes my elect one, with God speaking, sometimes also the Messiah, but only 3 times. And then perhaps in 1 or 2 cases, the righteous one with a big R and a big O. He sits on God's throne and he executes God's judgment. And how one responds or behaves towards the elect one is a criterion that reveals the wickedness or the righteousness of those who are humans on earth. Right at the end, there is a vision in chapters 70 to 71 that is sometimes thought to be secondary, that didn't belong to the initial vision. And here we meet, of course, quite a surprise. Enoch has all along, since chapter 45, really been looking upwards to this figure that God has chosen to sit on the throne of glory, to judge as his vice regent, and to carry out all sorts of duties and so forth. And then, Enoch is probably enamored by all of this, and certainly in his questions and conversations with the angel, he is. But then he is taken up to heaven in chapters 70 and 71. He's totally overwhelmed. His being is transformed. He's watching the angels. He's looking at the head of days, and God is moving around, it seems. It's not just steadfast sitting on the throne. And then at a point where the manuscripts kind of diverge, either the angel comes to him, maybe it's Michael, and or it is God himself who comes to Enoch and tells him, "You are the Son of Man." And it's something no reader might be expecting to find in the text, kind of at the highlight. But there are a couple things that needs to be said about that, namely, in a mystical context, if we want to take later Jewish literature as our cue for it, such transformations can take place in which the identity of the seer, who becomes involved in that which he is seeing, actually is transformed into something else, we have something similar happening to Enoch in what's called Hebrew Enoch or Third Enoch in the later tradition. The second thing to note is that if Enoch is told that he is the Son of Man, we are hard-pressed to think that this is a Christian text, or at least this part of Enoch is a Christian text. I cannot imagine that a Christian text would come up with a text that would then identify Enoch with the Son of Man. And this is especially because in many of the Ethiopic Christian manuscripts that refer to where the Son of Man is mentioned in the Book of Parables, there are marginal notes that are written by scribes that expressly identify the Son of Man, the elect one, with Jesus. So, they're reading it with Christian eyes. But when it comes to this passage in chapter 71, where Enoch is identified with the Son of Man, the marginal notes in manuscripts where they are abundant usually fall silent.
That's really interesting. So, so do you have, so it seems like what you're saying is, hey, this end part where it says that Enoch is the Son of Man, that if that's what, I guess, what the original writers were thinking, that there's no way this is a Christian text. Is that a good way to put it?
I think so. That's well put. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. So in my conservative circles that I've ran in the past, Enoch is seen as this really bad book because it contradicts, what Jesus is called as the Son of Man. It's like, oh, well, Enoch's called the Son of Man, so this is just not something to even read. But then I later learned that in scholarship, some have argued that this book of parallels, which includes the part that you're talking about here, which seems to contradict with the idea of Jesus being the Son of Man. It seems that some have argued that this is actually a Christian text. So that blew my mind. So how do scholars that do think that this is a Christian text or has some type of Christian influence, how do they understand that?
I think this goes back to J.T. Millick, for example, in the 1970s, and some have followed this cue of his, namely the abundance of the Son of Man in the tradition, which fails to show up in Jewish tradition from the period, other than here. It's just simply not there. So it's hard to see Jewish parallels to this. And then the only other tradition where we have it is, of course, Daniel. We could call that Jewish. That's fine. But it seems to go beyond that. In other words, it doesn't. Daniel doesn't presuppose the book of parables, but it's the other way around. And since the Son of Man is only really in the gospel traditions, all four gospels, maybe allusion or two in Paul, but then we have the book of Revelation, where one like a Son of Man occurs twice there. So that led J.T. Millick, in addition with the fact that we have no evidence for this one part in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are Christian which are pre-Christian, that we really have to do here with a later addition to the collection of Enochic works. The date of the Book of Parables that you were asking about earlier is, as you have already indicated, much debated. It's hard to say that the whole thing was written at one time by one author. There are Noah parts from chapter 65, especially, and the status of chapters 70 and 71 is debated. It may have its inception in the latter part of the 1st century BC, probably during the Herodian period, the early Herodian years, or maybe just before that because of the mention of the Parthians and the Medes, which fits with that particular period, and also references to the landowners. But the descriptions of the Son of Man and of the heavens and of the throne and so forth fits less well with the late 1st century, and to my mind fits even better towards the end of the 1st century, AD, which I think is fascinating. In other words, we have here a growing Enoch tradition that parallels the growth of Christian tradition. And it's not a question of what influences what so much as what is sharing Jewish culture along apocalyptic lines, to the extent that there is some symbiosis happening between the traditions. So Jesus being Son of Man in the Gospels may echo the kinds of developments that we see in the Book of Parables. And the Book of Parables may echo the kinds of things that are happening in the Christian tradition, but without actually referring to any of the Christian tradition. It's so much in the air, and then it disappears in both. Early Christian creeds, don't really have a whole lot to say about it, except he will come and judge the living and the dead. Have that in the later Nicene Creed. And that may allude to his function as Son of Man, but Son of Man figure is conspicuously absent in playing a role, a dynamic role in the development of Christian tradition, as well as in Jewish tradition from the Book of Parables.
That's fascinating. So if you were to go to the casino and if you had to bet whether the text of this text was, I guess, well, it seems like you're saying actually that it wasn't specifically Christian, it was just what was in the air, right?
I would say that that's right. Now, what's really interesting to me, we have now recovered another 100 or so witnesses to the text of Enoch, which were unstudied a few decades ago. So with this wealth of new information, what is conspicuous to me is how little, despite the temptation that it would have been, Ethiopian scribes have Christianized the text. This happens in a lot of other literature to so-called pseudepigrapha and so forth, like the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, like 4th Ezra and so forth. We have lots of Christian interpolations happening in the Latin, the Greek traditions, even the Armenian and so forth. But the Ethiopian scribal culture resists that for 4th Ezra as well, for the Book of Jubilees, and certainly for 1 Enoch. I have only found 4 exceptions out of over 150 witnesses, where when the text is actually being transmitted in a formal way or being quoted in a formal way, that an obvious Christian intrusion has taken place.
Interesting. So that is just the Ethiopic tradition. So it could have been earlier than that, right?
It was earlier. It was clearly earlier. And unfortunately, our earliest Ethiopic sources for this part of the book and for the rest of the book date to about 1400. But textually, some of the most significant pieces of the manuscripts are dated to the 20th century. which is in itself also very interesting.
Interesting. Okay. So just for people that might be a little confused here. So,
Okay.
so could you just summarize your position as far as the Christian influence? So you don't think that it was explicitly, like, originally the Book of Parables. Well, actually, let me ask you this. Do you think that we have the Book of Parables, specifically chapters 70 and 71? Do you think those were original to what was with the rest of the text, or just we don't know?
We don't ultimately know.
Okay.
However, the vocabulary of those chapters, the way the God is described, and the way even the Son of Man is described and so forth, aside from his identification with Enoch, is very continuous with the rest of the parables. So if it wasn't original, then I think clearly it was written by someone closely associated with the original part of the Book of Parables.
Interesting. Okay. So with that being said, in that case, so we don't know for sure. In that case, if it was, so like it could have technically originally been written by someone that was pro-Christian, or in that area or that group that was essentially like someone could have been a fan of Jesus and then it be edited later. It's also possible that it was originally not written by anyone that was a fan that was Christian and then edited later by Christians. Are those both possibilities?
The second possibility is probable.
Okay.
It was clearly not written by a Christian,
Okay.
by someone who was an adherent or follower of Jesus. However, it was certainly written by someone who was breathing the same air that many early Christian followers of Jesus were breathing.
I see. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's a really, really interesting text. So I appreciate you going through that there. So just to continue in our, I don't know, Christian influence topic here, could you talk about how widely the Book of Enoch, actually, I'm all over the place today, sorry. Before we get into that, could you briefly talk about what the, like, I guess the early Christians say, around Jesus's time, all the way up to 300 AD. What would you say most people that were Christians, that if they did consider it as an important scripture or text, or they decided from it, or whatever they thought about it, when people mention something like the Book of Enoch in this time period, are they thinking about just the Book of the Watchers? Are they thinking about the Book of Parables as well? Or are we unsure about it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That is a really good question. We know that already the different parts of 1 Enoch were being collected into same manuscripts amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's very clear. There are exceptions to that. There's nothing from chapter 108. There's nothing from chapters 83 to 84. And there's nothing from the Book of Parables, but little bits and fragments from the other main parts of what would become the Ethiopic Enoch are found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls and collected into several manuscripts in different constellations. So when people are thinking about the Book of Enoch in antiquity, they're probably thinking of the whole together. They were not at that time historical critics like we might want to be, or aspire to be, or not wanting to be. And they would not have been, knowledgeable about the whole stream of tradition, which we have access to today. That's not quite how communication worked. We were much more isolated. in silos at the time with the perforation for information to be transferred. So yes, I think that the Book of Enoch was probably thought to be a singular whole, but when it's referred to, we don't know whether it's one part that's referred to or more than one part that is being referred to at the same time. That remains very, very open. Tertullian knew of the Book of Watchers, and he probably knew of the Epistle of Enoch as well. And there's no sense that he's differentiating one from the other. If he is, he's not taking the trouble to explain that to his readers. So I think we are dealing with a collection that was considered a book as such by most people, though the manuscript evidence does not fully testify to that. Our earliest Greek evidence from the 4th, 5th centuries focus on big chunks of the Book of Watchers on the one hand and the Epistle of Enoch, Birth of Noah, on the other. But we don't know whether those manuscripts claim to be transmitting the whole of Enoch as they knew it, or if they're just copying part of it. So we really don't know. All we know is that finally, when we get to the Ethiopic tradition, which was translated sometime between the 4th and the 6th centuries, we have the most complete version of one Enoch that exists, with parts of it being shorter than the parallel texts that we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So some bits have gone missing.
That's very interesting. Okay, thank you so much for talking about that. That's important because when we're talking about, hey, is Jude referencing or quoting the Book of Enoch? It's like, well, what does that actually mean? And maybe we can get into that a little bit in specifics. But could you talk about how widely the Book of Enoch or parts of the Book of Enoch or the Book of the Watchers or whatever, how widely this text was considered inspired or authoritative or scripture, or however you want to define that, in early Christianity?
Good. We all know that it was debated,
Okay.
and that not everybody thought the same about it. Origen seemed to have two views of it. One was very sympathetic to it being considered sacred. I don't like the term authoritative. I don't even like the term canonical at this point, or even scriptural or not scriptural. But sacred I like because, in other words, this text was thought to contain theological meaning. Now, Origen also had some doubts about it. Some of that may be related to Tertullian's view, who regarded it as not only sacred, authoritative, scriptural, but also refers to those who would doubt this, because how could a writing attributed to someone who lived before the flood have survived the flood and made it all the way up until today? So he was really doubting. He was referring to those who doubt that it could have been written by Enoch himself. We though increasingly there is this interest in whether writings were actually written by those who are claimed to be the authors. We get this kind of discourse in the 3rd and more in the 4th century. And this is, of course, rather interesting and ironic in a way, because it was the claim that Hebrews was written by Paul that made it possible for Hebrews to get into the New Testament canon as such. And no, even evangelical today, though some Orthodox would differ on this point, would think that Paul was the writer of the book of the Epistle of Hebrews. So there are double standard kind of arguments going on during this period of time. And I would say, though, that certainly in the earliest Christian movement, behind the New Testament, the Enochic, I would say early Enochic tradition was highly valued, if not influential, certainly providing a key conversation partner for the way Christian theology could take shape in certain ways. The Epistle of Barnabas considers it scripture as well. And we see other instances of positive use in the 2nd century. I don't know if this addresses your point, but we in the West especially place a lot of importance on whether or not a text is cited, because we're really interested in influence. And there are many who have an approach to the Bible that is kind of like a bubble. It is internally self-referential, and anything that fits into the system without having to appeal to anything outside is what's really important, and that's what makes it the Bible, whereas everything else isn't. I like to think of the Enochic tradition, whether or not it could be thought to be canonical or scriptural or whatever, as a significant theological conversation partner for early Christianity. And in that way, I think there is a lot to be gained by contemplating its importance. I once gave the Frumentius lectures at the School of Theology, Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology in Addis some years ago. And at the end of the 3rd lecture, there were maybe 200 or 300 people there, I don't know. And one gentleman stood up and asked me, "Do you think that Enoch is scripture?" And my answer was, and would still be today, I can't decide that for you or for anyone else. But what I can do is to test out and explore its theological value. And to the extent that I can do that, then we have something to learn from the book.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That there is certainly an aspect of that of why people feel this is a text worth listening to, is that big question. So I appreciate you talking and addressing that. So yeah, as you were talking about, there's lots of people in early Christianity that either reference it or quote the Book of Enoch. And I mean, I've got a long list of people that I'm looking at: Jude, Barnabas, Clement of Alexandria, Athenagoras, Irenaeus. Yes. It's a long list. I'm just halfway through. But with that being said, you did talk about how there was kind of a debate. Now, it's my understanding that debate happens quite late compared to when Jesus was alive. So the earliest Christianity, I'm personally not aware of this huge debate. So you correct me if I'm wrong there. If before Origen and Augustine and all that start, that whole debate goes on, and there's that conversation about the formation of the canon and all that stuff. Before that starts to occur, are you aware of anybody before that starts to not see the Book of Enoch as sacred?
No,
Wow. Okay.
I'm not. I'm not aware of that at all.
Hmm.
Which I think is an interesting way to ask the question. Uh, is the cup half full or half empty? I would say full rather than half empty
Hmm.
in that regard. But the question of pseudepigrapha and
Hmm.
so forth became really, really important
Yeah.
for the church fathers,
Hmm.
beginning in the latter part of the 3rd century and the 4th, and then beyond. It wasn't entirely determinative, and that was a criterion that could be pushed too far. But I've had to think about this when looking at the Book of Enoch. Why? Because we have problems with people, using or plagiarizing on someone else's name
Hmm.
and then passing it off as their own. So the way I've been looking at it is, let's back up a little bit. 1 Enoch consists of 108 chapters.
Hmm.
We only get to the 108 through the Ethiopic tradition, the numeration. 5 main books and 2 appendices. But if we think about it, tradition historically, um, referred to the 5 bits of the Book of Watchers. I think we can talk about at least 21 different originally independent compositions
Hmm.
that
Wow.
were collected together into 1 Enoch. Now, what's puzzling is that if they were different, and there are different authors behind each of these, some of them overlapped with one another in time. So, how could, let's say you're Enoch and I'm Enoch, and we're both living at the same time, how could we write something authoritatively, being 2 completely different people, yet happening to borrow the same patriarch's name to make it our own?
Hmm.
So, I've been thinking about this, and I think that the best way to explain pseudepigrapha, not just in Enoch, but also in other writings, but especially in Enoch, is that we are to understand it not as falseness per se, but against the backdrop of theater production. Um, an actor will put on the mask of a character and wear that mask as long as that actor is on the stage. But when that actor leaves the stage, that actor lays the mask and becomes David, or whoever it is
Interesting.
that person is. And I think that's what's going on. It may even be happening to some of the Psalms in the Hebrew Bible. There are those who put on the mask, and it's not falseness. It's more about presentation and performance, and performance within a imagined or an ideal setting that then draws and creatively puts together sacred tradition in a new and dynamic way. So I think that's what's going on. And a few centuries later, this way of producing literature gets lost, particularly in relation to Enoch.
Hmm.
So then we have a conversation and debate concerning, well, could he or could he have not, which is not the sort of framework
Yeah.
out of which most of the parts of what we have as 1 Enoch today were generated.
Hmm. I see. Thank you so much for that. See that those are the tidbits you're not going to get from the typical person. So I really appreciate that. So back to that previous question, you got me thinking there. So if we don't have anybody before that whole debate starts to happen, that I guess it seems like some type of change of thought or new questions are being asked. If we don't have any uh, claims of saying, hey, the Book of Enoch is not sacred or something like that,
Mm.
do you think we could confidently say that all the Jews saw Enoch as sacred, or do we have stuff like the Pharisees and the Sadducees that might have been in specific camps, or they and other camps saw it this way? Do we have any idea? Is it just a guess, or what do you think there?
This is really difficult question, and the way you've asked the question reflects the difficulty of answering it.
Yeah.
We really don't have access to this kind of thing. What we do know is that most Jews prioritized what we now know and call the Torah or the Pentateuch.
Mm-hmm.
That's clear, and that there were prophets and there were writings. The one Enoch tradition, or the early Enoch tradition, wasn't typical to all of that. Not because it was apocalyptic, but because I think it did not emphasize Torah in the same way that many other contemporary Jewish writings did.
Mm.
And the Nicholasberg has made something of it, and I think Boccaccini has as well. And I think maybe they've gone too far as to suggest that one Enoch as a whole represents a kind of non-Torah emphatic Judaism, which lay a kind of conceptual groundwork maybe for early Christian thought that did have to appeal to the Torah, at every turn, which is a fascinating way to think. At the same time, so much of what we consider part of the Torah or the Pentateuch is referred to, alluded to, and almost quoted in one Enoch, in various parts of one Enoch. So to say that it's slightly anti, or that the Torah was really not of importance, is too negative a judgment on this tradition.
That's interesting. Thank you. All right. So that's one kind of section, the pre-discussion, I guess you could say. But let's talk about the Book of Jude. So this is probably the most widest known citation of in I guess what people consider the New Testament, where it seems like the writer of Jude was quoting the Book of Enoch. So what I'm going to do is I just want to read the text just real quick, and then we can discuss it. So let me see if I can get it on the screen here. Oh, I already was sharing it and then I messed it up. Oh, well. All right. That's okay. So that's that. That's that. Just skip a few slides here. All right. So Jude 1:1-4. So it starts just like a basic old sermon. Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and a brother of James, to those who have been called, who are loved in God the Father and kept for Jesus Christ. Mercy, peace, and love be yours in abundance. Dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people. For certain individuals whose condemnation was written about long ago have secretly slipped in among you. They are ungodly people. That's an interesting phrase there. Maybe we'll talk about that. Who pervert the grace of our God into a license for immortality and deny Jesus Christ, our only sovereign and Lord. Though you already know all this, I want to remind you that the Lord at one time delivered his people out of Egypt, but later destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling. Sounds like Enoch. These he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. In a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. They serve as an example of those who suffer the punishment of eternal life. In the same way, on the strength of their dreams, these ungodly people pollute their own bodies, reject authority, and heap abuse on celestial beings. But even the archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses, did not himself dare to condemn him for slander, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." Yet these people slander whatever they do not understand, and the very things they do understand by instinct as irrational animals do, will destroy them. Woe to them! They have taken the way of Cain. They have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. They have been destroyed in Korah's rebellion. So lots of Old Testament references there. These people are blemishes at your love feast, eating with you without the slightest qualm. Shepherds who feed only themselves. They are clouds without rain, blown along by the wind, autumn trees without fruit and uprooted twice dead. They are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shame, wandering stars for whom blackest darkness has been reserved forever. Here it gets good. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone and to convict them of all of the ungodly acts they have committed and their ungodliness, and of all the defiant words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. These people are grumblers and fault finders. They follow their own evil desires. They boast about themselves and flatter others for their own advantage. So I think that's pretty much what we need to know for what we're talking about today. So some people have said that the book of Jude here is quoting Enoch, and it looks like even the maybe the writer of this translation thought so too. Other people have said, oh no, it's just referencing, and there's no quote. It's got some similar words, but it's not the same thing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's clearly a quote.
Okay.
It's a reference to the Book of Watchers. There's absolutely no question about that. Paul very often draws on scripture, and at times he uses his own wording here and there, and isn't necessarily following tooth and nail what we have access to. And this is true in some of the chain quotations, for example, in Romans chapter 3. We see this kind of thing going on. And there's maybe a Septuagint or a Hebrew Bible behind it. And here, of course, we have that. Now, he is following, certainly, and our earliest Greek attestation of this, as you are showing, is in the Codex Panapolitanus, sometimes called the Giza Papyrus, from the late 4th century CE or AD. And here, of course, there are a few differences. If anything, if we compare the text in Jude and Enoch, there are some things that stand out. First of all, in the 1 Enoch text, it says that he is coming, not that he came, as according to Jude, Jude 15. The Lord came, and or what I see in front of me is 14. So that's interesting. This is a claim by Jude that something has happened in the past. And exactly who the Lord is certainly debated, whether it's God or whether it's a reference to Jesus already. Significant is, though, that I think the 1 Enoch 1:9 from the Codex Panapolitanus is perhaps a more accurate reflection of the early tradition, rather than what we have in Jude, who is using this tradition for his own purposes. The second thing is that he mentions ungodly more than the Enoch text does. He's really pressing. You referred earlier on, it was verse 4 or 5 or something like that, in Jude, which refers to the ungodly already at that point. It seems to be very much the emphasis. Yes, verse 4. They are ungodly people who pervert the grace of our Lord and so forth. It really pressing this home and is using the Enoch tradition and actually infusing it with more ungodliness than was probably there in the more original version of 1 Enoch, simply to press his point. Now, what's interesting here is, okay, one thing is what's going on in verse 15. Maybe the end of 14, verse 15. We don't need to worry about these. These verses came much, much later. So,
Yeah.
numeration is crazy sometimes.
Mhm.
But the reference to Enoch being the seventh from Adam, when we look at the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament,
Yeah.
or anywhere outside of scripture or in sacred Jewish tradition, the phrase that describes Enoch being the seventh from Adam is nowhere to be found. But it is to be found in one place, namely the Book of Parables in chapter 60, verse 8. So it suggests to me that in making this quotation and in framing it with this introduction, the writer is not only aware of the Book of Watchers, but may very well be aware of what we have in the Book of Parables, whether it's direct or whether, apart from the Book of Parables, there was some saying around about Enoch being this, but we just don't have any evidence for it aside from the Book of Parables. It just implies to me that already here in Jude, we not only have several allusions to the Book of Watchers earlier on in the text that you read to us, and also this citation from chapter 1, verse 9, we also have an awareness of the larger Enochic tradition, which includes the Book of Parables, and he can draw on this. So to me, this is kind of significant. It's tempting to make too much of it. And I think one thing that we all need to be careful is to overclaim things that we want to claim. And I have to be very careful about that. But it is tempting to see that there is some here awareness of a tradition that we only find, and in written form, in chapter 60, verse 8, I think that is, of the Book of Parables.
Yeah, it is a really, really interesting coincidence. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But it's also, it's not certain. Technically, it's possible that that phrase was used elsewhere, and they both just happen to be using that same phrase. But plus, I guess it's also possible that, hey, someone could have just come across it separately, right? Because
well, they could do
from Adam, right?
Yes, they could do the maths and go back to Genesis and say, well, how many generations until Enoch? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Boom,
Yeah.
we got it. But from Adam, and the seventh generation from Adam, that exact phrasing is only found in the Book of Parables. So
thank you. Yeah.
Just thought.
Still a really interesting coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another thing that people mention is that, or when I say people, I mean scholars. So that specifically says that Enoch prophesied, saying, and another number of different scholars have mentioned this. Let me see if I can pull it up. Is this what I'm looking for? Like basically, it's the typical or not typical, or one of the ways that other New Testament writers quote from Old Testament passages as like saying, hey, or like prophecy specific, like, hey, this is a fulfillment of that prophecy. And some have argued that, hey, this writer of Jude had to see that this text that's being cited was prophecy, and therefore had to be seeing it as sacred, because why else would you see it as prophecy? And the evidence for that is these words that are used, and you can see them on the screen. Do you agree with that logic, or do you think they're making too much of that?
I agree with much of that logic. The worry that I have about the debate in general is that it's so much framed out of an epistemology that we get out of the Enlightenment about truth and
Yeah.
about, from the Reformation. We could go into that in a big thing, which is looking for a certain kind of evidence to prove that something is authoritative as a whole or not, or just in this particular verse. We really don't know. There's so much we don't know, and it is as much a mistake to say that only this bit was considered authoritative, or none of the book was considered authoritative, as it is to say that the whole thing was.
Interesting. Okay.
I think that's a false debate. It's a debate that is an attempt to answer a question that relates to definitions of Christian fundamentalism and Christian identity on what the Bible is in its 66 books.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say that it's irrelevant, because it's a contemporary question.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it doesn't give us any real insight, debating this, into the setting in which Jude has arisen.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let me see here if there's anything else we wanted to ask about that. All right. So yeah, I do find it really interesting that the Book of Enoch was considered a very sacred text in this time period by a lot of different people, and then you have this writer Jude cite it and say that this guy Enoch prophesied. It seems like that he obviously had a very high opinion of the text, which is might be a surprise for a lot of people.
Yes, and in Ethiopian Orthodoxy, if I may say, in the 14th, especially 15th century and later, we don't have a lot of literature or writings from the earlier period.
Yeah.
Jude is an important part of the Bible. It's an extremely important part of the Bible, and it is one of the reasons why the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition in the 15th century resolved the debate around Enoch in favor of Enoch, with Jude playing a very vital role in that particular debate.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And so was there anything else you wanted to add about whether Jude saw Enoch as authoritative, sacred scripture, however you want to use those words?
Well, I mean, one could ask, what would be left in Jude if he did not refer to this? He would then have the example of Balaam. He would have the example of Sodom and Gomorrah, from the biblical tradition.
Yeah.
But he would not be able to draw on something more widely, and do so in several ways. The angels leaving their prior position, my goodness, this is 1 Enoch 15, one could say.
Mm.
And they're being bound, they're being judged. This is all verse 6 in front of us here on the screen. Reflects what we find in several parts of 1 Enoch, not least in 1 Enoch, the Book of Watchers, chapter 18, verses 15 and 16, which seems to be, rather clear. So he's actually thinking about the tradition beyond chapter 1. Maybe even all the way into the Book of Parables. We don't really know for certain. And he is drawing on an increasingly contemporary use of the Enochic tradition, which we find in some other Jewish writings, namely, and also in 2 Peter. Namely, we look back to what God did to the angels because of the sin that they committed. And we allow that story to take on what I would call a paradigmatic function. They behaved a certain way, and they were punished for it and held to account. Therefore, you, readers, should not act like they did, because you will be held to account if you sin in the way that they did. And of course, this goes on to other examples, Sodom and Gomorrah, and so forth. So it's a paradigmatic use. But I would say the more profound theological importance of the Enoch tradition doesn't lie in its paradigmatic function. They did this, therefore be this way, which we find in Jewish tradition, but rather the perspectives the tradition gives us at looking at what God has done in the past. With apocalyptic literature being not only interested in the future, revealing what will happen in the future, but also uncovering and recovering and reinterpreting the past in such a way that it is a place where God is seen to have defeated evil in a definitive way, so definitively and so completely that people now, that is at a later time, can trust that this defeat in the past is proleptic to the ultimate future defeat in which evil will finally disappear altogether. That is far more profound. And I think that's where the Enochic tradition offers a theological value. In Jude and in 2 Peter, we have this paradigmatic function. And in a sense, the authors didn't have to refer to Enoch to look at bad examples, of things, of people who were held into account for their behavior. There was plenty out there. And Paul did this in 1 Corinthians 10 and so forth. But Enoch was enough in the air, and there was enough interpretation of Enoch along these lines that they obviously pick up on this aspect.
Yeah. That isn't really interesting. It was clearly at least on their mind just a little bit in order to even reference it, even though they had other options there. So we've been going on for a while. Do you have enough time to get into 2 Peter?
We can, yes.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Because that's also a really interesting, fun topic, because it also seems like there's a reference there. So let me pull that up, see if I can get it on the screen here. Actually, let's talk about, while we're at it, just real quick, 1 Peter 3:18-20, if you're okay with going over that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course, that's an interesting, very interesting tradition. A PhD student of mine once wrote a book, Chad Pierce did. His dissertation with my supervision on this particular passage within the context of 1 Peter. It's a fascinating book, well written. I don't think in this case we have a clear reference to 1 Enoch.
Interesting. Okay. Let me go ahead and read it over, and then you can tell us why. So 1 Peter 3:18-20 says, "For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which also he went and made a proclamation to the spirits in prison." That's the key phrase there. "Who in former times did not obey, but when God waited patiently in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 lives, were saved through the water." So you don't think that these spirits in prison are being referred to the Watchers or anything in the Book of Enoch?
They could be.
Could be, okay.
There's no question about it. But there is another tradition, for example, in the Book of Jubilees, which places spirits, in the abyss and so forth. Some of them are allowed to continue their work, but only 10% of them. In chapter 10 of Jubilees, which is also, by the way, is biblical according to the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. Um, but when you have shared motifs
Yeah.
that are found in other texts, then there is nothing that compels us to be overly reductionistic in claiming that this must be one Enoch.
I see. Okay. So I can conceive a scenario where this writer of First Peter is aware of the Book of Jubilees and also aware of the Book of Enoch, or aware of none of them, but just
Right.
the similar story that's in the conceptual air of, oh, Jimmy was telling me about these guys, the Nephilim, that were doing this and that, and kind of sharing similar concepts in that story, from what you heard from down the street, that kind of thing. Is that what you're thinking about?
I think so. I think so. And it doesn't mean that what we have in Jubilees and 1 Enoch is not important for interpreting this. It's just that if we're wanting to ask the question of influence or what's behind, a generative text behind,
Yeah.
it's harder to make that claim here than it is certainly in Jude.
Yeah. Yeah. And if people aren't already familiar, so that parallel in these two texts here, specifically the spirits in prison, this could be like fallen angels that are referenced in the Book of the Watchers. We don't have to go too much in detail, but kind of what you talked about before there. Did you have anything else that was interesting or you think was worth mentioning about this text?
I think in the interests of time, we might want to proceed.
Okay, go for it.
But thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right. So then we have 2 Peter 4-5. It says, "For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of deepest darkness to be kept until the judgment." There's more to that verse. We can put on the screen if we need to. But what do you think about this text? What are your thoughts here as far as being a reference to Enoch, or what do you think?
Mhm. Certainly, the fullest depiction of this storyline is what we have in Enoch, not only chapter 10, which you have here, and it's really an angel or angels that execute this this judgment of God, not God directly, though God is no less involved, even though the angels carry that out. There is the there is a Tartarus kind of allusion in the animal apocalypse
Oh, okay.
as a place where they are cast and brought to. The Tartarus is, of course, we know it in its first in its I'm sorry in its first instantiation. I'm sorry for using that word. I just wrote it yesterday, and somehow it's like an earworm. In Hesiod's work, Theogony, in which the Titans and the monsters are put into Tartarus. The text here, though, in 2 Peter, doesn't say Tartarus. It says to tartarize. It's a verb, which is interesting. So they're tartarized, and that's unique. We don't really have that in 1 Enoch or actually anywhere else as a verb. But the storyline clearly echoes, if not alludes, to what we have in the Enochic tradition. And again, like mentioned in Jude, what we have are a series of stories that are appealed to as examples for how God doesn't let people who sin go off scot-free, but are being held responsible in every imaginable way, as a warning to readers to take their lives of faith very seriously.
I see. So do you have any thoughts? So if I could just conceptualize for you. So the writer of 2 Peter is using this word Tartarus, or however you want to pronounce that.
Mhm.
And that is actually what is translated as something like having cast them down to Tartarus.
Yes.
So a lot of words are actually just one word in Greek.
Um, yes.
Yeah, at least in our translations.
Yeah.
But if I am some Hellenistic Jew or maybe
Mhm.
not even a Jew in this time period, Hellenistic Christian in this
Mhm.
time period, writing Second Peter, not only do I have the Book of Enoch probably in my vision and idea at the back of my head, but I also have all these other views of Greece and myths and all that, even if I don't specifically believe those things. So some have argued that, hey, even though he's referencing the Book of Enoch, and even though that word Tartarus or whatever the word is in the animal apocalypse is in that text, there
Mhm.
also could be other background information that you mentioned about Tartarus, as all the Greek mythology is tied into this word of where they are. What do you think about that concept, or do you think it's probably just the Jewish concept of hell, or any idea about that topic, or we just don't know?
Well, obviously we don't know, but it doesn't mean there's not anything to say.
Yeah.
And that's or anything to learn, from knowing a bit about these other myths and so forth.
Yeah.
I think, we have these categories. We think about myths, and we think, pagan, no, and or something that we should eschew and sort of get rid of so that we can get to the real stuff. Of course, we know that in the pastoral epistles, the author complains about myths. But what are myths to him?
Yeah.
You know, uh, they're not just any myths. He must be thinking of something specific. And Philo complains about myths as well. But what is he complaining about? We don't really know. What we do know is that a lot of language that we find from Greek mythology, myth doesn't mean false. Myth means containing a storyline that conveys something meaningful to those who are engaging with it. That would be a more constructive or a positive definition of myth. And in that respect, I would want to say that the author of Second Peter here is drawing positively on language that is out there to convey something very meaningful
Hmm.
and to tartarize, so to speak. Tartarosas is the verb here, participle. He is drawing on language with which people are familiar, and maybe emphasizing that this is a place where a lid is put on the punishment of these beings, and that there was no way out for them after that.
Hmm.
And Tartarus would have been a beautiful image for depicting that, rather than the whole notion that they are going to be, let out again and
Hmm.
wreak havoc. Like sometimes we read in the book of Revelation, chapter 20,
Hmm.
he's put in the abyss and all of that. But then he's allowed out after a certain amount of time, for a brief time.
Hmm.
Here, the emphasis is on finality. And I think the use of the verb is a beautiful way of saying and conveying that, and of drawing attention to how serious the consequence is for the sin that was committed.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. I appreciate you mentioning that. I would not have considered that, but I also don't consider myself a scholar on this topic. So I did want to briefly talk. So this is the text of First Enoch 10, if people wanted to give it a quick read through. But otherwise, that's pretty much all I have for you today. It's been a absolute pleasure having you on. Did you have any other thoughts about this passage or anything else that you want people to know about before we get going?
Well, I just want to say that I will show this. This is the current Amharic Bible of
Oh.
the Ethiopian Church. And in it, the Book of Jubilees and in particular, the Book of Enoch take pride of place as part of the Old Testament. This was published in 2007, and there is a more current version of this, which is in Old Ethiopic, which just came out a few years ago. And there's a whole commentary tradition on the meaning of this, which I'm showing you here. It's called the Undemta, which takes it verse by verse and discusses and works through the meaning. I just draw attention to it because this is a tradition that goes back at least 1600, maybe more years, and has and in which the sacredness of Enoch has not disappeared. If anything, it has been enhanced in the last 600 years. And it has established itself even liturgically. And so, one of my goals as a researcher and also as a Christian is that if it is sacred there and nowhere else, I'd like to know why they think it is, and to see if we can come up with a way of dialoguing and learning from one another in this particular way.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on here. I really appreciate all those extra added thoughts here, and you've really added to our knowledge, and that's really, really helpful. So thank you so much. People should definitely check out your work. You've written a number of different articles on this topic and other topics, so people should definitely check it out. It'll be in the description. I really appreciate you coming on here. But otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Great pleasure to be with you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.